Well, one of the things that I have made a mistake about in the past that I just realized in the last couple of weeks was that, people often accuse me and they say, well, most of the people that listen to you are men. And I think, when you're accused like that, your automatic response is, well, you wouldn't be accused if you weren't doing something wrong. So there must be something wrong about that. It's like, why isn't it 50% women? And so I've said things like, well, 80% of the people who watch YouTube videos are men. And so the fact that 80% of the people who watch my videos are men isn't that surprising given that base rate. But then about 3 weeks ago, I started thinking, well, what the hell am I doing? It's like, what, is there something wrong with talking to men? Is that actually a problem? It's like I didn't set out to do that specifically, but if that's the way it's working out and there is a majority of men coming to my shows, say, then why is that all of a sudden supposed to be a bad thing? I'm asking men to be more honest, and especially in their speech and their thinking, and to be more responsible for themselves and for their family and for their community, and to grow up and to shoulder their burden and to live a responsible and meaningful life, and putting those two things together conceptually. And it's like, and then there's an accusation about that as if there's something wrong. And I thought, well, why am I even playing into this? It's like, fine, I'm talking to men. I'm encouraging them. And I am absolutely thrilled. Like every time someone comes up to me, and that's happening maybe 100 times a week or something like that, and tells me one of these stories about how they put their life together. It's like, I'm absolutely thrilled about that. And so I don't see, it's just a sign of how pathological our times have become in some sense, that there would have been any guilt about that to begin with. Because how is that not a good thing, man?
It's weird. I think a lot of that has to do with this concept that men are running everything and that men have this massive advantage. There's a white male advantage and privilege that we all enjoy and share, and that men have this advantage financially. There's disparity in terms of the gender gap in pay, and in income, and that if you were really a good person, you would be trying to balance that out, and that you wouldn't be trying to pump up the winning team.
Right, well, and that's the funny thing. Well, that's it, and that's part of that narrative that, well, if there's winners, there has to be losers, and the reason that there are losers is because there's winners. And that's complete bloody nonsense, because as far as I'm concerned, and I really believe this, is that every single person who sets out to put themselves together ethically is a net positive to everyone around them. There's no downside to that. And my book has been criticized by people who've read it very poorly, especially chapter 1, when I talk about hierarchies, that I'm somehow supporting the idea that power in a hierarchy is the right way to be. And there's absolutely nothing in what I've written that suggests that at all. Like, I'm suggesting that human hierarchies are very complex, and that the way that you win in a human hierarchy is by being competent and reciprocal. And so, I mean, for example, even if you're selfish, let's say, you got to think very carefully about what that would mean if you were selfish and awake, because you have to work to take care of yourself and what you want, say, in this moment. But then there's you tomorrow, and there's you next week, and there's you next month and next year and 10 years from now and when you're old. So because you're self-conscious and because you're aware of the future, you're actually a community unto yourself. And if you're selfish and impulsive, all that means is that you're serving the person you are right now, in that impulsive way, but not the person you're going to be. And so that's not a good grounds for any sort of ethical behavior. And I see that if you serve yourself properly, there's no difference between that and serving your family properly and serving your community properly, that those things all mesh in a kind of a harmonious manner. And one of the things that's really been effective in the lecture tour is a discussion about that idea and its relationship between that and meaning and responsibility, because one of the things that strikes the audience as silent constantly, because I'm always listening to them to see, when the attention is maximally focused, is whenever I point out to people that the antidote to the meaninglessness of their life and the suffering and the malevolence that they might be displaying because they're resentful and bitter about how things have turned out, the antidote to that is to take on more responsibility for themselves and for other people, and that's aspirational, which is kind of cool. The conservative types, the duty types, and I'm not complaining about them, they're always basically saying, well, this is how you should act, because in some sense that's your duty, right? That's how a good citizen would act. And that's a reasonable argument. But the case that I've been making is more that, well, there is value distinctions between things. Some things are worth doing and some things aren't, and you can kind of discover what that is for yourself, and then you should aim at the things that are most worth doing. And what you'll find if you watch carefully is that the things that you find worth doing are almost always associated with an increase in responsibility. Because if you think about the people you admire, for example, you spontaneously admire people, and that's a manifestation of the instinct to imitate. Again, people are very imitative. You don't admire people who don't take care of themselves. Like, unless there's something wrong with you, you at least want an admirable person to be accountable for themselves. And then if they've got something left over so they can be accountable for their family, well, then that's a net plus, obviously. That's someone you think is solid. And then maybe they take care of some more people. They have a business or they're involved in the community in some positive way. You see, well, that's a person whose pattern of being is worth imitating. And that's all associated with responsibility. And it's so interesting because it's as if everybody kind of knows this, but that it hasn't crystallized. It's like, well, you should be responsible because that's what a good citizen is. It's not, no, you should be responsible because you need to have a deep meaning in your life to offset the suffering so you don't get bitter. And the way you do that is to bear a heavy load, to get yourself in check for you now and for you in the future, and then to do the same for your family and your community, and that there's real nobility in that, and there's real meaning. And more, the other thing that I've been suggesting to people, and I also believe this, is that, and I think that the guys that have come to talk to me, especially the ones that have had real rough lives, they really understand this. If you don't get your act together and you let yourself slide, then what kind of moves in to take the place of what you could have been is something that's really not good at all. So it's not only that if you're living like a dissolute life, that you're not aiming at anything positive, and so you don't have any real meaning, and you're subsumed by anxiety and all of that and hopelessness, but something kind of hellish moves in there too to occupy that place, and so then you end up making things worse. And when, one of the things I learned about studying totalitarian systems, whether they were on the right or the left, was that part of the reason that the totalitarian horrors of the 20th century manifested themselves was because average people didn't take on the proper responsibility. They shut their eyes when their eyes should have been open, even though they knew it. And they did and said things they knew they shouldn't have done and said. And that was what supported those horrible systems. So, if you don't get your act together, then you leave a little space for hell. And I really believe that.